Okay, guys, we're on to the last chapter of Dealing with Dragons, chapter 15, in which the dragons crown a new king and Cimarine gets a new job. The walk to the ford of Whispering Snakes took longer than Cimarine had expected. The trees in the enchanted forest grew close together in many places, forcing the dragons to take a zigzag path instead of heading straight up the river bank. Warag, who was in the lead, seemed to be setting a deliberately slow pace. Cimarine was sure he was hoping that the second shift of wizards would arrive at the blackberry clearing before the dragons at the ford had been warned. She had no idea what would happen, but she doubted it would be good. The escort dragon was not interested in Cimarine's worries, however, and he refused to speed things up, so the group ambled on. As they approached the ford at last, they heard cheering ahead of them. Warag flinched visibly, and Alienora and the Stone Prince were startled out of their quiet conversation. "What's that?" Alienora said. "Sounds to me as if we have a new king," their escort said with great satisfaction. "That means I can get the lot of you right off my hands. What a relief! I thought I was going to be stuck with you for hours." Alienora looked faintly indignant at this unflattering opinion. Morwen was merely amused. Warag's wings sagged momentarily, but then he seemed to pull himself back together, and continued on as confidently as ever. Cimarine's concern deepened. What if Warag managed to convince the new king they were all lying? They reached the edge of the clearing, not the clearing, the cheering crowd of dragons. "Who did it?" the escort dragon asked. "Who's the new king?" "How should I know?" another responded. "I can barely see a thing from here." "We'll find out soon enough," the escort dragon said, and then he raised his voice to a shout. "Make way! Coming through! Prisoners for the king! Make way!" The crowd of dragons parted reluctantly, and the escort dragon herded the group forward, still shouting. They made their way through the cheering dragons until they reached the edge of the river. "Stand away!" someone from the crowd shouted. "Stand away for the new king!" The dragons nearby drew back, leaving Warag, the escort dragon, and Cimarine and her friend standing by themselves on the trampled moss. As the dragons moved away, Cimarine caught sight of Kazul, lying comfortably beside the river. "Kazul!" Cimarine cried, and ran forward. "Are you all right?" The mottled dragon standing beside Kazul shifted and flicked his tail angrily at Cimarine. "You should say your majesty," he said with a warning scowl. "Don't be ridiculous, Frax. She's my princess," Kazul said. "I'm quite all right, Cimarine. What are you doing here?" "You're the new king of dragons?" Cimarine said in astonishment. But, when you left this morning you could barely fly. How did you get Colin's stone all the way from here to the Vanishing Mountain?" "Colin's stone apparently does more than pick out the right king," Kazul said. "The minute I picked it up I felt fine." "That's impossible," Warag said. "Are you accusing me of fraud?" Kazul asked in mild tones. "He'd better not," Cimarine said. "He's the one who is cheating, with the help of Zeminar and the rest of the wizards." "Really?" said Kazul with great interest. "That's all nonsense," Warag declared. "The girl's just trying to attract attention." "Really?" Kazul said again, and smiled, displaying all of her silver teeth. "Oh, come on now, Kazul. Surely you won't take the word of a princess over mine." "That depends entirely on what she has to say. Tell us about it, princess," Kazul commanded. So Cimarine told them. She brought the Stone Prince forward to explain what he had overheard the wizards and Warag discussing in the banquet hall, and she made Alienora tell everyone about melting the wizards with wash water and lemon juice. She told about getting to the ford of Whispering Snakes on the first feather and being unable to convince any of the dragons to listen to her, and she told about going to Morwen's house to find out where the wizards were, and about using the last feather to get to the wizards and melt them. She described Zeminar's unexpected appearance and subsequent melting, and the way that Morwen had broken the wizard's spell, and she finished with an account of Warag's futile attack. "And then he landed," Cimarine said, waving a hand in the direction of the escort dragon, "and decided to bring us all back here, and I think somebody ought to go back to the clearing where the blackberries are before the next batch of wizards arrive. I don't know what they'll do when they find out what's happened, but—" "Yes, I see," Kazul said, and she turned to the pale green dragon beside her. "Take 5 or 6 of the younger dragons, the ones who've been talking about starting a wizard hunt, and go and have them look at this blackberry clearing. Yes, your majesty, the pale dragon said with a fierce grin. Surely you don't believe this, Warag said. Kazul stared at Warag without saying anything, and the dragons around the edge of the circle rattled their scales. Ugh, your majesty, Warag added hastily. Why should I disbelieve it? Kazul said, still watching Warag. The whole thing is preposterous, Warag said. How could the wizards do anything to affect Colin's stone, your majesty? I'm sorry, Kazul, Cimarine said, shaking her head. I know what the wizards were trying to do, but I don't have the slightest idea how they were doing it. I believe I can explain that, your majesty, Morwen said, and she stepped forward, tossing and catching the wizard's black rock casually in her right hand. They were using this. I believe you'll find it comes from the caves of fire and night. From the king's cave, in fact, where Colin's stone was found. And one of the properties of the caves of fire and night is that you can use a piece of it to cast spells which affect all similar pieces. Just the way that impossible book explains, Cimarine exclaimed. Yes, I suppose the book is rather impossible to read, Morwen said. Is this sufficiently similar to Colin's stone that the wizards could have affected the stone through it? Kazul asked. Certainly, your majesty, Morwen said. This is, Warag began. Ridiculous, impossible, and unbelievable, Kazul said. You already said that, but I haven't heard you say anything particularly convincing in support of that attitude. Oh, really, your majesty, Warag said. Next you'll be saying I poisoned King Tokaz. Doesn't seem likely, Kazul admitted, since Tokaz was poisoned with dragon's bane, and dragons can't get anywhere near the stuff without feeling its effects. What if Zeminar made a dragon's bane proof packet for him to carry it in, Cimarine said, thinking of the bag that Antrel had been carrying when she and Eleonora met him in the valley. Something that would melt when he dropped it into the king's coffee. I suppose it's possible, Kazul said. But there's no evidence that Zeminar did any such thing. What would it have looked like? Eleonora asked suddenly. Would it have been something like a very large tea bag? Everyone turned to look at Eleonora. I think that would have worked quite well, Princess, Kazul said. Why do you ask? Because Warag had something like that with him when he went to go see King Tokaz the night before he was killed, Eleonora said. I saw it. Angry muttering ran through the crowd of dragons. Lies, Warag snarled. They're all lies. Are they? Kazul said coldly. I don't think so. You must have wanted to be king very badly indeed. Aye. Warag darted a glance around the circle of the dragons, and what he saw did not appear to reassure him. No! Consorting with wizards, killing the king, a plot to cheat the trials with Colin Stone, Kazul said as if Warag hadn't spoken. Hardly proper behavior for a dragon. The crowd muttered in agreement, and Cimarine looked from Warag to Kazul and back. Warag appeared to be terrified of something, but Cimarine could not tell what it was. He crouched and seemed to shrink away from Kazul, drawing his wings in close and making himself as small as possible. Cimarine blinked. It was remarkable how much smaller Warag could make himself look. In fact, he's shrinking, Cimarine exclaimed. No, Warag cried, but it was much too late. He shrank faster and faster, his wings melting into ridges along his back, and his claws retracting. He was barely as tall as Cimarine's shoulder. And then, with a sudden shiver, he collapsed in on himself, and a small rain of scales pattered the ground. A moment later, an extremely warty toad, with angry red eyes, crawled clumsily out of the center pile. Is that Warag? Eleonora asked in a hushed tone. The toad turned and glared at her, and she stepped back a pace. The stone prince put a protective arm around Eleonora's shoulders and glared back at the toad. Behave or I'll step on you, he said. Yes, it's Warag, Kazul said, and she sounded almost sad. That's what happens when a dragon stops acting like a dragon. The toad turned his glare in Kazul's direction and hopped off and disappeared among the stones along the river bank. Eleonora shuddered. Kazul studied her for a moment. You were Warag's princess, weren't you? I'm sorry about all this, but it couldn't be helped. It won't take long to find you another dragon. I don't think you have to worry about finding her another dragon, Cimarine said. She'd been watching Alienora and the Stone Prince, and an idea had occurred to her. What? Why not? Said Kazul. Because the Stone Prince fought with Warag, and Warag certainly didn't win. Doesn't that mean he gets to rescue Warag's princess? I'm not sure the rules cover this situation at all, Kazul said, but it sounds reasonable enough, and under the circumstances I doubt anyone will object, unless of course she does. Oh, Alienor said and blushed a rosy red. No, I don't object at all. Are you sure? The Stone Prince said anxiously. You don't mind waiting a while to marry me? I mean, if you're willing to marry me. You needn't, if the idea doesn't appeal to you. It appeals to me very much, Alienora said, blushing redder than ever. But why do you say we have to wait? The Stone Prince sighed. I still have to find a king and do him a great service, and that's bound to take a while. For a young man as intelligent as you seem to be, you're remarkably foolish, Morwen commented. What on earth do you think you've just done? An expression of astonishment spread across the prince's face. You mean the king I was supposed to serve is the king of dragons? Exactly, Morwen said. I doubt that you could do her a greater service than saving the throne from Warag's plotting. It's settled then, Kazul said. Let's get the rest of the ceremonies finished and get back to the mountains. There's a great deal of work to be done. All of the dragons bowed, and the movement began in various sections of the crowd. Shortly, 2 dragons came forward, carrying Colin Stone. It looked like a long black log, about 3 times as thick as Cimmerine's waist, and twice as tall as she was. The dragons laid it in front of Kazul and backed away. Another dragon appeared, holding a large circlet made of iron, with 6 spikes pointing upward in different intervals around the rim. Kazul set her front feet on the black stone, and set the dragon circlet on her head. The crowd of dragons began cheering, and after a few minutes they began forming a line to congratulate their new king and present their coronation gifts. Other dragons set up large tubs of wine and platters of meat and cheese that were quickly surrounded. In the middle of the presentations, the dragons Kazul had set off to the blackberry clearing returned, and Kazul took a short break from accepting congratulations to hear what they had to say. The wizards showed up before we'd been there 10 minutes, Your Majesty, the pale green dragon said, who was the leader of the group. 6 of them, just like your princess said. They weren't happy to see us, the young dragon said smugly. I would think not, Kazul smiled. What did you do with them? We chased 5 of them away, the pale dragon said. I don't think they'll be back either. 5? The pale dragon shot a glance at the youngest of the group, who licked his lips and looked even more smug than before, but said nothing. Yes, Your Majesty. I see. Well, that's more than enough evidence to confirm what Cimmerian has told us, Kazul commented. She raised her voice. The arrangement between the dragons and the Society of Wizards is hereby cancelled. From now on, wizards will not be allowed anywhere near the Caves of Fire and Night, no matter what they say. Then she went back to accepting presents and congratulations from her new subjects. Cimmerian watched the festivities with mixed feelings. She was very glad that Kazul was the new king of dragons, but she couldn't help but wondering what effect Kazul's coronation would have on her own position. Certainly the king of dragons wouldn't need a princess as a mark of status, and there would be plenty of younger dragons eager to cook and clean for the king, if only as a way of getting a start at the court. Her preoccupation stayed with her for most of the day, and through the entire coronation picnic and the flight back to the Mountains of Mourning, Cimmerian and Alienora rode on the back of a very large dragon, whose scales were a dark green. They almost looked black. Alienora would have preferred to ride with the Stone Prince, but none of the dragons were willing to take on a second passenger if the Stone Prince was first. All of the dragons paid their respects to Kazul at the coronation, so the cave was empty when the dragon dropped Cimmerian off. And when Cimmerian said goodbye to Alienora, she promised to come over and help her pack up in the morning. Then she went in and waited for Kazul to come home. Kazul did not arrive until very late, and she was still wearing the iron crown. She looked tired. Thank goodness that is over, she said, taking the crown off and throwing it across the cave. It hit the wall and bounced off with a harsh clang. You shouldn't treat your crown like that, Your Majesty, Cimmerian said, retrieving the iron circlet. Of course I should. Kazul said. It's expected. That's why we made it out of iron instead of something soft and bendable. And don't start calling me your majesty. I've had enough of that for one day. Cimmerian began to feel a little better. What happens next? Tomorrow we'll start moving, Kazul said and sighed. It'll probably take weeks. It's too bad there's no way of warning a new king in time to pack everything up before the work starts. Everything? Cimmerian said in tones of dismay. Even the library and the treasure vaults? But I've only just got them organized. Everything, Kazul said. And if you think straightening things out here was difficult, just wait until you see the mess that the official vaults are in. Oh dear, Cimmerian said. Is it very bad? Kazul nodded. I've just come from looking at it. You'll see yourself tomorrow. There's a smallish cave next to the library that I think will do nicely for you. But I'd like you to have a look at it before we start hauling things around. You mean you want me to stay? Cimmerian blurted. But I thought the King of the Dragons didn't need a princess. Don't be ridiculous, Kazul said. How am I going to get my Cherry's Jubilee if you don't stay? And we haven't even gotten started cataloging the library. And how else am I going to get the king's treasure vaults organized so that I can find things? I'm not going to have time to do it. Won't the rest of the dragons object? Kazul snorted. I'm the king. One of the advantages of being king is that nobody objects to whims like this one. If it bothers you, we'll give you a different title. The king's cook and librarian, maybe. Stop worrying about it and go to sleep. Tomorrow is likely to be a very busy day for both of us. Cimmerian smiled and went off to her rooms with a light heart. She slept soundly and was up early the next morning. Kazul was already awake and supervising 3 of the younger dragons, who were packing up the treasure in the library. Since Cimmerian was pressed into service at once, it was several hours before she could get away to keep her promise to Alienora. I'm sorry I'm late, Cimmerian apologized when she arrived at Warag's cave at last, but it didn't occur to me that Kazul would be moving too, and she wanted me to help. It's all right, Alienora assured her. It wasn't as big a job as I expected, and the prince helped. I'm almost finished. She gestured to an almost full suitcase that was lying open on the floor. On the other side of the room, the stone prince was stacking empty drawers from Alienora's bureau. Well, at least I got here in time to say goodbye, Cimmerian said. You're staying with the dragons, then? The stone prince asked, straightening with a frown. Are you sure you want to do that? Of course she's sure, Alienora said. Kazul's going to need her even more now than she did before, and Cimmerian wouldn't be happy in a normal kingdom. How did you know that? Cimmerian said, staring at Alienora. It's obvious. Linderwall is about as normal a kingdom as you can get, and if you ran away from there, you certainly wouldn't be happy anywhere like it. I didn't mean that part, Cimmerian said, reddening slightly. I meant about Kazul wanting me to stay. That's obvious, too, Alienora said. You're the only one who was worried about it. She studied Cimmerian for a moment and shook her head. I wouldn't like to be a princess for the King of Dragons, but it would suit you down to the ground. I think it will, Cimmerian said, smiling. Then maybe you can tell me something, the Stone Prince said. What's being done about the wizards? They've been banned from the Mountains of Mourning, and there are 100 or so dragons out there checking to make sure they're gone, Cimmerian replied. They haven't had much luck, I'm afraid. Most of the wizards left after the first few got eaten. That's all? Asked the prince. What else can the dragons do? The wizards didn't actually poison King Tokaz. Warag did that. And there's no justification for an all-out attack on the headquarters of the Society of Wizards, even if all the dragons agreed they wanted to do it, which they don't. I suppose you're right, the prince said. But you'd better tell Kazul to keep a close eye on them. Those wizards will make more trouble just as soon as they figure out how to do it. I don't know about that, Cimmerian said. I think Zeminar was behind most of it, and you melted him. That's it, Alienora said and snapped her fingers. I almost forgot to tell you. Morwen and I talked for a long time yesterday, and she said that melting a wizard isn't permanent. You mean they'll all come back? Cimmerian said. Alienora nodded. It'll take them a while, though. And Morwen said that you should come and visit her soon. She thinks that in a few days she'll have figured out a way of melting the wizards without dumping soapy water all over them. The method is a little sloppy, was the way that she put it. That will be useful if the wizards start making trouble again, Cimmerian said thoughtfully. Is this everything, Alienora? The Stone Prince asked, gesturing to the suitcase. Yes, I think so. Alienora pulled the top of the suitcase over, and the stone prince set one foot on it very gently in the middle and pushed until the latch clicked. Where are you going first? Cimarine asked. His kingdom or yours? Neither, Alienora said, smiling. We're going to Morwen's. She said she could change him back from stone to normal. We asked Kazul last night if we could go through the caves of fire and night, and she said yes, so. I don't know, Alienora, the stone prince said. I'm beginning to get used to myself this way, and there are certain advantages. There are certain disadvantages, too, Alienora said, blushing, and Cimarine began to giggle. Alienora's blush deepened. How are you going to get rid of that chip in your sleeve if you can't change your clothes? I think I see what you're getting at, the stone prince replied, eyeing Alienora meditatively. And you're quite right. There's no comparison. We'd better see what Morwen can do as quickly as possible. Alienora and Cimarine took a look at each other and burst into unstoppable giggles. The stone prince blinked at them. It's not funny, he said indignantly, which only made them giggle harder. Shaking his head, he waited for them to stop, and then picked up Alienora's suitcase. Shall we go? Cimarine walked with them to the iron gate that led into the caves of fire and night, and a purplish dragon was waiting there to guide them through the caves. Kazul was taking no chances on Alienora and the stone prince getting lost. Cimarine hugged them both and wished them a safe journey. And I hope you both live happily ever after. I hope you, Alienora called back as she and the stone prince followed the dragon through the gate. Cimarine waited until they were out of sight, and she started back to Kazul's cave. She thought about Morwen and the wizard melting spell, and about Zeminar and Antrel and all the other wizards who would somehow be back soon. She thought about Kazul and about straightening out the treasure vaults that belonged to the King of Dragons, and about all the hundreds of books in the King's library, and all of the problems that the King of Dragons would have to deal with. She thought about Alienora's last words and smiled. Happily ever after? Cimarine wasn't so sure about that, but she was certainly hoping to enjoy herself. She was positive, however, that life with the dragons would be interesting and busy, and in Cimarine's opinion, that would go a long way towards making her happy. Happily ever after. I don't think it's quite what you meant, Alienora, Cimarine murmured to the empty tunnel, but one way or another, I rather think I will. The end. That is the last of Dealing with Dragons, but it's not the last of Cimarine. You can read more about her adventures in Searching for Dragons, which is book 2 of the Enchanted Forest Chronicles. And book 3 and 4 follow her son and Morwen, I think. I always read the first 2 more than the last 2, but they're all great books, and I encourage you to check them out. I'll be back next time reading a different book. Until I see you again, stay happy and stay safe. Goodbye, guys.